I've got a wild Sicilian Najdorf for you here. Domaraju Gukesh against Anish Giri. So this was the Armageddon game. They'd had a very tough classical game that ended in a draw. So they went into an Armageddon game. Gukesh, 10 minutes. Giri, 7 minutes. But of course, black has draw odds. So Gukesh is in a must-win situation. By the way, I'll give you the overall scores right at the end. So Gukesh playing white, and he switches from d4 that he played in the classical game and goes for e4 and goes into Giri's Najdorf variation and plays very gently with bishop e2. Of course, black has quite a choice here. You can play Scheveningens with e6, but Giri goes for the classical Najdorf move e5. And that's the move I've always favoured in this position, because it's nice for black to plant a pawn in the middle. I've always liked this pawn structure. I've played the Kalashnikov, the Sveshnikov, and the Najdorf, and they have this same pawn structure. I feel very comfortable with that. Because when you have more space in the centre, it allows you sometimes to put this bishop here, which is a very nice square. So this d5 square is covered, and black often wants to break with d5 if possible. But Gukesh, instead of castling here, Gukesh goes for knight d5. So this has become quite a popular move over the last 20 years or so. We're going to get a change in the pawn structure now. By the way, if knight takes pawn, then bishop b6 and knight c7. Of course, black can take this immediately, but it's nice just to hold back for a moment with knight d7. Black doesn't need to fear the exchange on e7, and that means that the e pawn is now attacked because the b6 square is covered, and white plays queen d3 to just cover this one. And queen d3 also, perhaps with the idea of castling queenside. I mean, there's quite a choice that black has now. One way is to exchange on d5 straight away, but Giri castled. I'll come back to that position later on, because I've played that with black and I chose a very different way to play. But castles is absolutely normal. And Gukesh decides to play a4 to start this sort of clamp of black's queenside. And it means that, well, black can't exchange on d5 with the knight. You'd quite like to keep your bishop, but you can see that that bishop is trapped because the queen covers here. Therefore, Giri exchanges on d5 with the bishop. Now, white has the two bishops. At the moment, it's not clear that they're doing very much. I mean, that queen is slightly gets in the way of this bishop. The previous game went rook c8 here. This is Elyanov against Wojtaszek, which went like this. And this is a very common idea, to bring the bishop out to g5, exchanging off that bad bishop. And that gives black more control over the dark squares, and retreating the knight allows black to push this kingside pawn majority. But instead of rook c8, which is a very normal continuation, Giri plays knight c5. That's a very interesting way of playing, but also quite a common strategy as well. So an exchange on c5. Now that pawn means that on c5 means that white isn't going to get in c4, c5, but white does now have a protected pass pawn on d5. But black does this because that square can be blockaded very easily, and that gives black a little bit more space. So e4 and bishop d6. So a beautiful blockader, and this bishop is on a great diagonal here. So in some ways, this exchange has given black more security in the middle and on the queen side, because it's going to be very difficult for white to advance here. And means that black is trying to get things going on the king side, using that pawn as a kind of spearhead, and perhaps that bishop can reach e5. Sometimes that knight can spin round, and yeah, that kingside pawn majority could be quite potent. So what's white doing? a5. So Gukesh continues that clamping. Later on, it might be possible to go for b4 and then push with c5. Queen c7. So there we go. Nice influence on this diagonal, looking down at the king side. And here, well, the previous game, this is a game played in Germany, Kurman against Musharu, which went g3, knight d7, castles, and f5. So this is the traditional way for black to play, to try and get this in, and this knight can swing round here. So g3 is a pretty normal move, but here Gukesh plays a very interesting idea. He went h4. Wow, very aggressive indeed. Remember, he's in a must-win situation. After knight d7, okay, it's the standard maneuver to bring the knight here and play f5. g4. Wow, this is something else. So it means that if f5 comes, then white can exchange that off, and I mean, this pawn duo potentially advancing down here is quite dangerous. So white is looking to exchange, and maybe that will bring the bishop onto the light squares, which could be rather good, slamming on e6. So now black has quite a choice here. So do you continue playing in the middle of the board with, let's say, knight e5, looking to perhaps come in on one of these squares? Do you play with f5? Or do you break on the queen side? You know, you could play b6 or b5 in this position. So this is very difficult to judge which way you go. Difficult to judge in a classical game, let alone, well, a kind of blitz game here. Remember, 10 minutes for white, 7 minutes for black. Giri plays rook e8. Okay, looks reasonable. So he's seems to be throwing his lot in, or in the middle and on the king side. But I mean, b5 is a decent move there, and you looked for play down the b file. But rook e8, and Gukesh continues with h5. I mean, this is extraordinary because it's not clear where white's king is going, and is this really going to be some kind of successful attack when, well, the rooks aren't connected? It's unclear where the king is going. Knight e5, and here is crunch time for white, because this kind of move is coming, one of these moves, and the king cannot stay in the middle. So how would you play here with white? Don't think you really want to castle kingside. Doesn't look right with these pawns up the board. Castling queenside? Well, if castles queenside, then black will break things open with b6. So what do you do? Well, Gukesh played king d1. So he wants to keep the rook on a1 to perhaps guard against b6. Perhaps there'll be a bit of pressure there. And he's just walking the king to c2. f5. So Giri breaks. He thinks this is the right moment, and it does seem reasonable to do this when the king is going on this little march across the board. And now he switches back. with rook b8. So now he thinks, okay, now's the time to break. Rook h4. Now we can see one of the points of playing with g4 and knocking out that f-pawn, that pawn in the middle is actually vulnerable with rook h4. Very nice. So Giri goes for counterplay with b5. He's trying to stir things up. And yes, if rook takes pawn, then, well, it's getting a little bit tricky. But Gukesh was really cool here, very calm. He exchanged on b5, and then he took the pawn. So although these look rather impressive, in fact, the king is sort of safe in front of them because there's no open file. And in the meantime, watch out for this one. So we can see it was rather clever to keep that rook on a1. c4. Pawn advances, but, well, who gets there first? Can black break open? Well, not really. I mean, this is actually looking really strong. It's going to tie that rook down, and of course that pawn is not only supported by the rook, but by that bishop as well. So knight d3. Okay, Giri trying to stir things up, and maybe that opens things here. a7. The rook has to block. And now a very nice move. I mean, this knight, it looks like an octopus knight. But instead of exchanging it off, Gukesh very coolly plays bishop g4. And finally, this bishop gets into the game, and wow, it turns into a fantastic piece. Of course, rook takes pawn, bishop e6 check wins that rook. So both bishops looking absolutely wonderful now. Rook e5 played, bishop e6, check. An exchange of rooks and queen a5. Well, it's quite clear that the initiative has swung round completely. That this rook is passive, the queen comes in fact, white is very well coordinated here. And it's very nice that these bishops are protected. So that just makes everything secure. Giri has to avoid a queen exchange. It's the only chance, but really you can see that white is now dominating the position. And Gukesh takes another pawn. Check. And king d2. King is staggering around, but actually it's pretty safe. It's very well covered here. So it's a winning position for white. But let's see how Gukesh tries to finish this off. First of all, king e2. Well, now that's on a light square. So again, a very calm move. He's not rushing it. Queen e8. Threatening a pawn. Okay, rook h1. Defends the pawn. And that a pawn is covered by the bishop. Queen f8. Rook h3. Okay, there's no drama. The rook comes up and perhaps wants to get into the game like this. Queen e8. King f1. Very calm. He's just making sure that his king is going to be absolutely safe before he undertakes any action. Giri thrashing around, wants to come in here. King g2. The king is safe. Queen d1. That queen is covering lots of squares here. No drama. Rook h1. The queen just has to go back again. And finally, with everything secure, and you can see that black's king actually really lacks defenders, Gukesh crashes in with bishop takes pawn. This is very nicely calculated, actually. Well, Giri took the a pawn, but if pawn takes bishop, well, let's see how this might finish. King here. Rook h4. Once this rook comes into the game via g4, it's game over. So, for example, this didn't happen, folks, but let me just show you what could happen here. Well, with these three pieces attacking the king, of course, it's over. For example, I mean, there are lots of ways this could go, but let's just have a quick look at this. and queen e6 mate. But, well, you get the picture. Black's king really has no defenders around it at all. So instead of taking here, Giri took on a7. And bishop e3, the bishop came back again. Aha! But having removed that pawn, then it's the h-pawn's turn. Queen e7. Okay, I'm sure Giri was relieved to take that a-pawn, but now the game switches to the other side of the board and the king is opening up. And h7, so watch out for a check on this diagonal. So therefore bishop e5, but now queen e4. Attacks the bishop, which moved back. And now d6, all the pawns are advancing. So the diagonal is now open, queen attacked. d7, this is pretty sorry state of affairs for black. And one final move, rook c1. And rook c8 is coming soon. And the pawn is going to queen with complete devastation. Wow, what a game. Gukesh, he's just 17 years old. Really impressive. Such a brave game. But he really had it under control. Let me take you back to some earlier moments in the game. I think we can see how influential White's bishop pair was in this game. So just coming back here at this moment when Gukesh started his little journey with the king, knight f3 instead of f5 looks like the move. And after the exchange, I think really, yeah, I think White needs to exchange because this knight could well come in here and perhaps bishop e5. So after the exchange, the rook might want to come into e4 if queen d3. Bishop f4, you can see that black's counterplay is gathering pace here. If the king was safe, then perhaps this would be okay, but White has to manage the king as well as this counterattack in the middle, and that could potentially be difficult. So yeah, that looks like the way to go for black. And even later on in this position, instead of switching back here, then knight f3 to force the exchange of bishop for knight. I think that's quite important. But coming way back in the opening, so I've had this position as black a long time ago. This was in the German Bundesliga, I think in 2000. And I exchanged on d5 instead of castling as Giri did. And then I played h5 because I was very concerned about this idea with g4. I think there'd been an earlier game, Khalifman against Gelfand, which went castles, kingside in g4, and Khalifman won a very nice game. So yeah, I was playing Khalifman in the Bundesliga, and this was my attempt at an improvement just to stop g4, and actually it worked out quite well. After h3, I played h4. Well, we had a pretty wild game, but it finally ended in a draw. But yeah, it's an interesting way to play. Now, let me just give you a little word on the standings. Fabiano Caruana hit back and won his classical game against Abdusattorov. Incredible resilience. So Caruana leads the tournament with 13.5. Nakamura has 11. So with 3 games to go, still wide open. All the other classical games were drawn and went to Armageddon. That was in round 6. You can see full results at Norway Chess or Chess24 as well, or ChessBase. Round 7, Caruana plays Gukesh. That's going to be very interesting. And Nakamura has White against Mamedyarov. Those are the top pairings. Thanks for watching.